The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as High Coordinator of the collective raised his seven-fingered hand. Holographic displays flickered to life across the massive circular room, casting blue light over the representatives of 47 different species. This was the moment they had waited 3 galactic cycles to witness. The results of the Universal Problem-Solving Initiative were finally ready for presentation. For the first time in recorded history, the Council had invited a newly discovered species to participate in their most prestigious evaluation program. The humans of Earth had only made first contact 18 months ago, yet they had somehow convinced the Council to grant them observer status and eventual participation rights. Many delegates considered this a waste of resources. What could a species barely capable of interstellar travel possibly contribute to civilizations that had conquered the stars ago? Senior Analyst 7 of the Synthetic Collective stepped forward. His chrome body reflected the chamber lights as he began speaking in the universal trade language. He explained that the initiative had presented identical crisis scenarios to evaluation teams from 12 participating species. Each team had worked independently to develop solutions. The scenarios ranged from colony evacuation procedures during stellar events to resource allocation during multi-system famines. The first results displayed showed the Dominion's approach to the colony evacuation scenario. Their solution was mathematically elegant. They had calculated optimal evacuation routes based on ship capacity, fuel efficiency, and stellar radiation patterns. Their projections showed a 92% survival rate with minimal resource expenditure. The representative nodded with obvious pride as murmurs of approval spread through the chamber. Next came the crystalline hegemony's solution. They had approached the same problem through pure logic chains, creating a decision tree with over 40,000 branches. Their system accounted for every possible variable and contingency. The survival projection reached 94%, though the implementation required significant computational resources. Species after species presented their solutions. The hive consciousness of offered collective coordination protocols. The temporal scholars of Meridian proposed predictive modeling based on probability mathematics. Each approach reflected the fundamental nature of its creators. Each solution was impressive in its sophistication and scope. Then the display shifted to show the human evaluation team's submission. The chamber fell into confused silence. Where other species had submitted detailed mathematical models, flow charts, and algorithmic decision trees, the human submission appeared almost primitive. It contained a simple document with 3 pages of text, several rough diagrams, and something labeled Emergency Response Framework. High Coordinator leaned forward in his seat. He asked 7 to explain what they were looking at. The analyst paused before responding. He admitted that the human approach had initially been flagged as incomplete or possibly corrupted during transmission. However, upon deeper analysis, they had discovered something unexpected. The human framework did not attempt to solve the evacuation problem directly. Instead, it established what they called adaptive response protocols. These protocols trained decision-makers to recognize patterns, make rapid assessments, and adjust their actions based on changing conditions. The humans had included something called gut instinct guidelines that encouraged leaders to trust their experience when data was incomplete. A delegate laughed openly. He asked how primitive intuition could possibly compete with precise mathematics. His question echoed the thoughts of many in the chamber. 7 requested patience. He activated a simulation that would test each species' solution against real-world variables. The Council had developed this simulation over centuries. It introduced random elements that no predictive model could fully anticipate: equipment failures, unexpected solar flares, communication breakdowns, crew members making mistakes under pressure. The solution performed first. Its elegant mathematics held steady until the simulation introduced a cascading equipment failure in the 3rd evacuation wave. The rigid protocols struggled to adapt. Survival rate dropped to 71%. The crystalline hegemony's decision tree fared slightly better. However, when the simulation removed key communication relays, their system could not distribute updated instructions. Final survival rate settled at 73%. One by one, the sophisticated solutions of advanced civilizations crumbled under the weight of chaos. Random factors they had not predicted created scenarios their precise systems could not handle. The average survival rate across all non-human solutions came to 68% when real-world complications entered the equation. Then 7 ran the human framework through the same simulation. The chamber watched in growing disbelief as human-trained evacuation leaders made decision after decision that seemed to defy logical analysis. When communications failed, local commanders took initiative based on their training and assessment of the situation. When equipment broke down, crews improvised solutions using available materials. When the simulation introduced a scenario where standard protocol would have resulted in significant casualties, the human-trained leader made a choice that violated every established guideline but saved an additional 3,000 lives. Final survival rate for the human approach, 89%. The number hung in the air like an accusation. A delegate from the Union demanded an explanation. He insisted there must be an error in the simulation. How could a less advanced species outperform civilizations with thousands of years of additional development? 7 displayed his analysis. The human approach succeeded precisely because it did not try to predict every possible outcome. Instead, it trained individuals to recognize categories of problems and respond with flexibility. Where other species built systems that told their people exactly what to do, humans built frameworks that taught their people how to think. The analyst highlighted a specific moment in the simulation. An evacuation coordinator had faced an unexpected scenario. His training told him to wait for updated instructions from the central command. He waited. People died while he waited. A human coordinator in the same scenario had assessed the situation, made a decision based on incomplete information, and acted. His choice was not optimal. A mathematical analysis would show he could have saved more lives with a different approach. But he had acted quickly enough that his imperfect choice still produced better results than waiting for perfection. High Coordinator asked the human delegation to explain their methodology. The humans had sent only 3 representatives to the council. They were not scientists or mathematicians. The lead delegate was a woman named Sarah who had spent her career managing emergency response operations on Earth. She stood before the assembled representatives of galactic civilization and spoke simply. She told them that humans had learned something through centuries of disaster response. They had learned that no plan survives contact with reality unchanged. The universe was messy. Chaos was normal. Systems that required everything to go perfectly would always fail when things went wrong. She explained that human emergency response training focused on principles rather than procedures. Their responders learned to assess situations quickly, identify the most critical needs, and take action even when they lacked complete information. They were taught that a good decision made immediately was usually better than a perfect decision made too late. A crystalline delegate interrupted. He pointed out that their approach led to mistakes. Individual judgment was unreliable. Their decision tree methodology eliminated human error from the equation. Sarah agreed that humans made mistakes. She said they made mistakes constantly. But she added that their training also taught them to recognize mistakes quickly and adjust course. A rigid system that made no individual errors but could not adapt to unexpected circumstances was more dangerous than a flexible system that made small errors but corrected them. She pulled up the simulation data. The human-trained coordinators had made 17 individual decisions that a perfect analysis would consider suboptimal. but they had also made over 200 real-time adjustments as situations evolved. The other species systems had made 0 individual errors, but also 0 adaptations. The council debated for hours. Some delegates argued that the simulation was flawed. Others suggested that humans had somehow cheated. A few demanded that the evaluation be conducted again with stricter parameters. But Seven presented additional data that silenced the objections. He had analyzed over 5,000 historical crisis events across council space. He had compared outcomes based on the response methodology used. In every category where adaptability mattered, flexible approaches outperformed rigid ones. The pattern was consistent across centuries and across civilizations. The synthetic analyst offered his conclusion. He said that humanity had not developed superior technology. They had not discovered advanced mathematics. They had simply refused to pretend that reality would obey their models. They built their systems around the assumption that things would go wrong, and they trained their people to respond to wrongness rather than to follow procedures designed for situations that would never actually occur. High Coordinator made the final pronouncement. He declared that the human evaluation framework would be studied and potentially integrated into Council emergency response protocols. He invited the human delegation to participate in a working group that would develop new training methodologies based on their principles. As the chamber emptied, representatives from a dozen species approached the human delegation. They had questions. They wanted to understand how humans taught their people to make decisions without complete information. They wanted to know how humans remained calm when systems failed around them. They wanted to learn the secret of embracing chaos. Sarah smiled as she answered their questions. She told them there was no secret. Humans lived on a planet that tried to kill them with earthquakes, hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, and countless other disasters. They had spent their entire history responding to crises they could not predict. They had simply built their civilization around the understanding that safety was temporary and preparation meant being ready for the unknown. One young delegate from a species that had evolved on a stable world asked her if that was frightening. He asked how humans could function knowing that disaster could strike without warning. She considered the question carefully before answering. She said that yes, it was frightening, but fear had its uses. Fear kept humans alert. Fear made them prepare. Fear drove them to build systems that could bend without breaking. Species that had never known fear had never needed to develop those systems. She looked around the council chamber at the representatives of civilizations that had conquered star systems and built wonders beyond human imagination. She thought about how fragile all of it suddenly seemed. These powerful species had built their empires during periods of relative stability. They had created systems optimized for normal operations. But the universe was not always normal. The universe did not care about optimization. Humanity's gift was not intelligence or technology or physical capability. Humanity's gift was the ability to function in chaos. They had evolved on a world that was actively hostile to their survival, and they had not merely survived. They had thrived. They had developed cultures built around the expectation of crisis and the commitment to perseverance. The Galactic Council had wanted to evaluate human problem-solving approaches. They had expected to find primitive techniques that might offer curiosity value. Instead, they had discovered that the species in their community had already learned lessons that ancient civilizations had somehow missed. Best practices had been identified. The universe was listening. And humanity, as always, was ready for whatever came next.